The gunshot that killed her husband was meant for her. And now Delilah Reynolds had been running for 3 years straight across territories where law meant nothing and mercy meant even less. She stumbled into Mineral Point, Wisconsin on a Thursday afternoon in late September 1877, dust coating every inch of her worn traveling dress, her dark hair matted beneath a bonnet that had seen better days. The frontier town was smaller than she had hoped, which meant fewer places to hide but also fewer places for dangerous men to lurk unnoticed. Her green eyes swept the main street with practiced caution, taking in the saloon, the general store, the blacksmith shop, and a modest hotel that looked like it might accept a woman traveling alone without too many questions. What she did not expect was to collide directly into a solid wall of man as she rounded the corner near the livery stable. Nathan Pierce caught her by the shoulders before she could fall backward into the mud. His calloused hands were surprisingly gentle for someone so large, and when she looked up into his weathered face, she saw eyes the color of aged whiskey that held equal parts surprise and concern. "Madam, I apologize," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to come from somewhere near his boots. "I was not watching where I was going." Delilah jerked back from his touch as if burned, her hand instinctively moving toward the small pistol hidden in the folds of her skirt. Nathan noticed the movement but did not comment, simply raising his hand slowly to show he meant no harm. "I am fine," she said quickly, her voice hoarse from days of traveling with little water. "Excuse me." She tried to move past him, but Nathan did not step aside immediately. Instead, he studied her face with an intensity that made her want to run despite the exhaustion weighing down her limbs. "You look like you could use a meal and a place to rest," he said finally. "The hotel up the street is run by Mrs. Henderson. She is a good woman, fair prices." "I can manage on my own, thank you." Delilah pushed past him this time, her shoulder brushing his arm as she hurried toward the hotel he had mentioned. Nathan watched her go, a frown creasing his brow. He had lived in Mineral Point for 5 years now, working as the town's unofficial lawman after the previous sheriff had been killed in a mining dispute. He knew the look of someone running from something. He had worn that look himself once, back before he had settled here, and tried to make something resembling a life out of the loneliness that had become his constant companion. At 32 years old, Nathan had resigned himself to the solitude. Most women in town were already married or had no interest in a man who spent his days dealing with drunks and claim jumpers. The few unmarried women who passed through were usually heading somewhere else, somewhere better than a small mining town in southwestern Wisconsin. He had stopped hoping for anything different years ago, but something about the woman with frightened eyes and defensive posture stuck with him as he continued his rounds through town. Inside the hotel, Delilah counted the meager coins left in her purse and felt her stomach clench with anxiety. She had enough for perhaps 3 nights and a few meals, but then what? She would need to find work, which meant staying in one place long enough to establish herself, which meant risk. Everything meant risk. Mrs. Henderson proved to be exactly as the large man had described, a plump woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Delilah painfully of her own mother, dead now for a decade. "Just arrived in town, dear, Mrs. Henderson asked as she slid the registration book across the counter. "Yes, madam." Delilah signed the book with a practiced false name, Dorothy Richards. She had used so many names over the past 3 years that sometimes she almost forgot her real one. "Will you be staying long?" "I am not certain yet. Perhaps a few days." Mrs. Henderson's expression was knowing but not unkind. "Well, if you are looking for work, the dressmaker's shop could use help. Mrs. Thornton was just mentioning it yesterday, and the school teacher, Miss Abernathy, has been poorly. They might need someone to help with the younger children. Delilah felt a flicker of something that might have been hope before she ruthlessly squashed it down. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless. Thank you. I will consider it. Her room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the main street. Delilah locked the door behind her, wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, and finally allowed herself to collapse onto the bed. Her entire body ached with a weariness that went far deeper than physical exhaustion. She was 25 years old and felt ancient. The life she had planned with Thomas, her husband, felt like a dream from someone else's memory. They had been married barely 6 months when Marcus Dalton had come looking for her. Thomas had not even understood what was happening when the bullet struck him in the chest, meant for the wife he had thought was simply a seamstress from Philadelphia. He had died not knowing that Delilah had witnessed a murder in that city, that she had seen Marcus Dalton shoot a man in cold blood during a business dispute, that Marcus was the son of a powerful railroad magnate who could make witnesses disappear. She had been running ever since, working odd jobs in different towns, never staying long enough to form attachments, always watching over her shoulder for the hired men Marcus inevitably sent after her. The guilt over Thomas's death was a constant weight in her chest, a reminder of why she could never stop moving, never let anyone get close. Sleep came in fits and starts, punctuated by nightmares of gunshots and blood. The next morning, Delilah forced herself to venture out into town. If she was going to stay even a few days, she needed to understand the layout, find the escape routes, identify potential dangers. It was a routine she had perfected over the past 3 years. The September air was crisp with the promise of approaching autumn, and Mineral Point was already bustling with activity. Miners heading to the lead mines that had given the town its prosperity, families doing their shopping, children playing in the street. It was all so painfully normal that Delilah felt like an imposter simply walking among them. She was examining the goods in the window of the general store when a familiar voice spoke behind her. "Good morning, madam." Delilah turned to find Nathan Pierce standing a respectful distance away, his hat in his hands. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair shot through with gray at the temples, and a face that looked like it had been carved from the same rough stone as the surrounding bluffs. He wore simple clothes, dark trousers, a cotton shirt, and a vest. A badge glinted on his chest, of course. He was the law. Delilah's pulse quickened with instinctive fear. "Good morning," she managed, keeping her voice neutral. "I wanted to apologize again for yesterday," Nathan said. "I hope you found Mrs. Henderson's establishment satisfactory." "It is fine, thank you." An awkward silence stretched between them. Nathan seemed to be searching for something to say, which struck Delilah as odd. Most lawmen she had encountered were either dismissive of women or overly familiar. This man seemed almost shy. "I am Nathan Pierce," he finally said. "I serve as sheriff here, though the title is mostly informal. If you need anything during your stay or if anyone bothers you, please let me know." "I appreciate that, Sheriff." Delilah did not offer her false name, hoping he would not ask. But Nathan simply nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and touched the brim in a gesture of farewell. "Enjoy your day, madam." She watched him walk away, his long strides carrying him toward a group of men arguing outside the saloon. He moved with the confidence of someone comfortable with authority, but without the swagger she had seen in so many men who wore badges. Against her better judgment, Delilah found herself curious about him. She spent the rest of the morning exploring the town, and eventually found herself at the dressmaker's shop Mrs. Henderson had mentioned. The proprietor, a thin woman with graying blonde hair and clever fingers, looked her over with an assessing eye. "Mrs. Henderson sent word you might be stopping by," Mrs. Thornton said. "Do you have experience with sewing?" "Yes, madam. I worked as a seamstress for several years." This, at least, was true. Delilah had always been skilled with a needle, and it had served her well during her years of running. "Can you show me?" Mrs. Thornton produced a piece of fabric and thread, and Delilah set to work on a simple seam. Her stitches were small and even, the mark of someone with genuine skill. Mrs. Thornton watched for a few minutes before nodding in satisfaction. "I can offer you $3 a week plus lunch while you are working. The hours are 6 days a week, morning until early evening. Does that suit?" $3 was barely enough to cover room and board, but it was something. More importantly, it was indoor work that kept her off the street where she might be recognized. "Yes, madam, that suits me fine." "Good. You can start Monday. What name shall I call you, Dorothy?" "Dorothy Richards." As Delilah left the shop, she felt that dangerous flutter of hope again. Maybe she could stay here for a few weeks, build up enough money to keep moving. Mineral Point seemed quiet enough, far enough off the main routes that Marcus Dalton's men might not think to look here. Maybe she could rest, just for a little while. Over the following days, Delilah settled into a careful routine. She worked at the dress shop, ate modest meals at the hotel or occasionally at the small cafe near the courthouse, and spent her evenings locked in her room, reading by lamplight or mending her own worn clothes. She spoke to people only as much as necessary, deflecting personal questions with practiced ease. But she kept running into Nathan Pierce. It seemed impossible that one man could be everywhere in a town this size. Yet there he was, breaking up fights outside the saloon, helping old Mr. Garrett fix a broken wagon wheel, checking in on Mrs. Henderson to make sure none of her guests were causing trouble. Every time Delilah turned around, she caught glimpses of him moving through town like a guardian spirit in dusty boots. And every time he saw her, he tipped his hat and offered a polite greeting, nothing more. No questions about where she came from or why she was here. No unwanted attention or improper suggestions. Just simple courtesy that began to wear down Delilah's defenses, despite her best efforts to remain aloof. 3 weeks after her arrival, everything changed during an evening storm. Delilah had stayed late at the dress shop to finish a rush order for a miner's wife who needed a dress for a wedding. The rain started as a whisper and quickly became a downpour, the kind of storm that turned the streets to rivers of mud and made the wooden buildings groan and creak. Mrs. Thornton had already gone home, trusting Delilah to lock up, so she was alone when she heard the shouting outside. Through the shop's front window, she could see 2 men fighting in the street, both of them soaked and slipping in the mud. One of them had a knife. A small crowd had gathered despite the rain, watching with the morbid fascination people always seem to have for violence. Then Nathan Pierce was there, wading into the fight with calm determination. He caught the man with the knife by the wrist, twisted hard, and the weapon fell into the mud. The other man took a swing at Nathan, who ducked and drove his shoulder into the attacker's midsection, sending him sprawling. It was over in seconds, both men subdued and being dragged toward what must have been the town's small jail. But as Nathan turned to follow his prisoners, Delilah saw the dark stain spreading across his left arm, visible even through his wet shirt. The knife had found its mark after all. Without thinking, Delilah grabbed her shawl and ran out into the rain. She caught up with Nathan just as he was locking the 2 men into cells, both of them already passed out from drink. "You are bleeding," she said, her voice sharper than she intended. Nathan looked down at his arm with mild surprise, as if he had not noticed the injury until she pointed it out. "It is just a scratch. Let me see it." "Madam, I am fine. You should get back to the hotel before you catch a chill." Delilah stepped closer, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. "Sheriff Pierce, I have some experience tending wounds. Please let me help you before that scratch becomes infected and costs you the arm." Something in her tone must have convinced him, because Nathan nodded slowly. "There is a room in the back with a stove and some medical supplies. Doc Wilson keeps it stocked for emergencies like this." The room was small and cluttered but blessedly dry. Nathan lit the stove and a few lamps while Delilah examined the medical supplies. The cut on his arm was deeper than she had hoped, but not as bad as she had feared. A clean slice that would need stitches. "Sit down," she instructed, heating water and gathering what she needed. Nathan obeyed, settling into a wooden chair and rolling up his sleeve to expose the wound. His forearm was corded with muscle and marked with old scars, evidence of a hard life. Delilah felt an unexpected twist of sympathy as she cleaned the blood away. "This is going to hurt," she warned as she threaded a needle. "I have had worse." She worked quickly and efficiently, her stitches small and neat. Nathan did not flinch, though she saw his jaw tighten when the needle pierced his skin. The silence between them was oddly comfortable, broken only by the sound of rain hammering against the roof. "Where did you learn to do this?" Nathan asked finally. Delilah hesitated. "My father was a doctor. He taught me some things before he died." This was true, though she left out that her father had been killed by the same fever that took her mother, that she had been only 16 and alone, that she had worked her way through the next few years doing whatever honest work she could find until she met Thomas, and thought she had finally found safety. "He taught you well." Nathan watched her face as she worked, his expression thoughtful. "You have been here almost a month now, but you still look over your shoulder every time someone walks past. Who are you running from, Dorothy?" Her hands stilled. It was the first personal question he had asked her, and it hit harder than she expected. "What makes you think I am running from anything?" "Because I have seen that look before. I wore it myself for years." Nathan's voice was gentle but firm. "And because someone like you, with your skills and education, would not be hiding in a town like Mineral Point unless you had good reason." Delilah finished the last stitch and tied it off, then busied herself with bandaging the wound to avoid meeting his eyes. "My reasons are my own, Sheriff." "I know, and you do not owe me any explanations." Nathan waited until she had finished with the bandage before he continued. "But I want you to know that you are safe here. Whatever you are running from, whoever is looking for you, they will not touch you while I am around. That is a promise." The sincerity in his voice made Delilah's throat tight with unexpected emotion. She had been alone for so long, had trusted no one and relied only on herself. The idea that someone might actually protect her, might actually care whether she lived or died, was almost too much to process. "Why would you do that?" she asked quietly. "You do not even know me." Nathan stood, towering over her in the small room, but somehow his size did not feel threatening. Instead, it felt solid, dependable. "I know enough. I know you work hard and keep to yourself. I know you are kind to Mrs. Henderson and patient with the customers at the dress shop. I know you fixed old Mr. Garrett's coat buttons last week and would not take payment for it." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "And I know what it feels like to be alone and afraid. I would not wish that on anyone." Delilah looked up at him, really looked at him for the first time since they had met. She saw the loneliness in his eyes that matched her own, the weariness of someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for too long. And she saw something else too, genuine caring, offered without expectation of anything in return. "I witnessed a murder 3 years ago," she heard herself say, the words spilling out before she could stop them. "In Philadelphia. The man who did it is powerful and connected, and he has been trying to silence me ever since. My husband died because of me, because I was not careful enough. I have been running ever since, and I cannot stop because if I stay in one place too long, his men will find me." Nathan did not look shocked or frightened by this revelation. Instead, he simply nodded as if she had confirmed something he had already suspected. "What is your real name, Delilah?" "Delilah Reynolds." "That is a beautiful name." Nathan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently touched her shoulder. "Thank you for trusting me with this, Delilah, and my promise stands. You are safe here." The warmth of his hand seeped through the fabric of her dress, and Delilah felt something shift inside her chest, some wall she had built beginning to crack. She wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that she could finally stop running. "I should go," she said, but she did not move away from his touch. "The rain is still heavy. Let me walk you back to the hotel." They stepped out into the storm together, Nathan holding a lantern in his good arm while Delilah huddled under her shawl. The streets were deserted now, everyone else having the good sense to stay indoors. They walked close together, not quite touching but near enough that Delilah could feel the heat radiating from his body. At the hotel entrance, Nathan paused. Water dripped from the brim of his hat, and his shirt clung to his frame. He looked like he wanted to say something but was not sure how. "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow evening?" he asked finally. "There is a decent restaurant near the courthouse. Nothing fancy, but the food is good." Delilah knew she should say no. Getting close to anyone was dangerous for her and for them. But the loneliness that had been her constant companion for 3 years suddenly felt unbearable, and the hope in Nathan's eyes was impossible to resist. "Yes," she said quietly. "I would like that." Nathan's smile transformed his entire face, making him look years younger. "I will come by at 6, if that suits you." "That suits me fine." She watched him walk away into the rain, the lantern light growing smaller until it disappeared around a corner. Then she went inside, climbed the stairs to her room, and lay awake for hours trying to understand what she had just started. The next day dragged by with agonizing slowness. Delilah worked at the dress shop, her fingers flying through alterations and new orders, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept second-guessing her decision to accept Nathan's invitation. What was she thinking? She could not stay in Mineral Point. She should never have told him the truth about why she was running. She was putting him in danger just by being near him. But when 6 o'clock arrived and Nathan appeared at the hotel, freshly shaved and wearing clean clothes, all of her doubts evaporated. He looked nervous, she realized with surprise. This strong, confident man who broke up knife fights without flinching was actually nervous about having dinner with her. "You look lovely," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her glad she had spent extra time fixing her hair and putting on her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out her eyes. "Thank you. Your arm, how is it?" "Barely hurts at all, thanks to your excellent doctoring." The restaurant was indeed nothing fancy, just a simple establishment run by a German couple who served hearty food in generous portions. But it was warm and clean, and the other diners paid them no more attention than a few curious glances. Nathan proved to be surprisingly easy to talk to. He asked questions but did not pry, shared stories about his work as sheriff but did not boast. Gradually, Delilah found herself relaxing, laughing at his dry observations about the various characters in town. "So how did you end up in Mineral Point?" she asked as they worked through plates of roasted chicken and potatoes. "You do not strike me as someone who grew up here." Nathan's expression grew more serious. "I did not. I grew up in Missouri on a farm. When the war came, I joined the Union Army. I was 19 and thought I understood what I was getting into." He paused, his jaw working as if the memories were difficult to swallow. "By the time it ended, I was 23 and understood too much. I could not go back to the farm. Everything felt too small, too quiet. I drifted for a few years, taking odd jobs, trying to figure out who I was supposed to be now." "What brought you here?" "A woman, actually." Nathan smiled ruefully at Delilah's surprised expression. "Her name was Catherine. I met her in Illinois and followed her here because she had family in the area. I thought maybe we could build a life together, but she had different ideas. She was kind about it when she ended things, at least. Said I was too haunted by the war, that she needed someone who could be fully present instead of always carrying the past around. That must have hurt." "It did, but she was not wrong." Nathan met Delilah's eyes across the table. "That was 7 years ago. I stayed because I had nowhere else to go, and the town needed someone to keep the peace. I built a small house on the edge of town, established a routine, made myself useful. But useful is not the same as happy. Useful is not the same as truly living." Delilah understood exactly what he meant. She had spent 3 years being useful in various towns, working hard, keeping her head down, surviving. But she had not been living. She had been existing, moving from place to place like a ghost. "You think it is possible?" she asked quietly. "To stop running from the past and actually live in the present?" "I do not know," Nathan admitted, "but I would like to try. And I think trying would be easier with someone else, someone who understands." The weight of his words hung between them, heavy with possibility. Delilah felt her heart beating too fast, felt the familiar urge to run warring with a newer, stronger desire to stay. "I am afraid," she confessed. "I am afraid that if I stop running, if I let myself care about someone again, they will end up like Thomas, dead because of me." Nathan reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "I am afraid too, afraid of being alone for the rest of my life, afraid that I have forgotten how to let someone in. But I think being afraid together might be better than being afraid alone." Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes. When was the last time someone had been so honest with her, so vulnerable? When was the last time she had allowed herself to be honest in return? "I do not even know if I remember how to do this," she whispered. "How to be with someone, how to trust." "Neither do I. We can figure it out together if you are willing." She looked down at their joined hands, his so much larger than hers, strong enough to protect but gentle enough to comfort, and she made a decision that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. "Yes, I am willing to try." Over the following weeks, Delilah and Nathan began courting in earnest, though neither of them used that word. They took walks together in the evenings after Delilah finished work, wandering the streets of Mineral Point as the autumn leaves turned gold and crimson. They shared meals at the restaurant, or sometimes at Nathan's small house on the edge of town, where he cooked surprisingly good stew, and she taught him how to make proper biscuits. Delilah learned that Nathan was patient and thoughtful, that he noticed small things like when she was tired or worried. He brought her wildflowers from the hills surrounding town and fixed the broken chair in her hotel room without being asked. He made her laugh with his stories about the ridiculous disputes he had to settle as sheriff, and he listened without judgment when she needed to talk about her fears. Nathan learned that Delilah was stronger than she appeared, that beneath her caution was a woman of fierce determination and quiet courage. She had survived things that would have broken most people, yet she remained fundamentally kind. He loved the way she bit her lower lip when concentrating on difficult sewing work, the way she always saved part of her dinner to feed the stray cats that hung around the hotel, The way her eyes lit up when she laughed. They were falling in love, though neither of them spoke the words yet. It felt too new, too fragile, like something that might shatter if examined too closely. Then, on a crisp November morning, everything came crashing down. Delilah was opening the dress shop, her breath misting in the cold air, when she saw the two men on horseback at the end of the street. They wore long coats and sat their horses with the easy confidence of men who were very good at violence. But it was the way they were looking around, studying faces and buildings with methodical precision, that made her blood run cold. Marcus Dalton's men. They had found her. Her hands shook so badly she could barely get the key into the lock. She needed to run, needed to grab her things from the hotel and get out of town before they spotted her. But even as the thought formed, she knew it was too late. One of the men had turned his horse in her direction, his gaze sharp and assessing. She ducked into the shop and locked the door behind her, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Think," she commanded herself. There was a back door that led to an alley. If she could get to Nathan, if she could warn him and then disappear, maybe he would be safe. Maybe she could lead the men away from Mineral Point before anyone else got hurt. But as she turned toward the back of the shop, she heard the front door handle rattle, followed by a heavy knock. "Miss Reynolds," a voice called, smooth and almost friendly. "We know you are in there. We just want to talk." Delilah pressed herself against the wall beside a dress form, hardly daring to breathe. Her small pistol was back at the hotel, useless. She had nothing but scissors and sewing needles to defend herself with. "Miss Reynolds, Mr. Dalton wants to make a deal. You testify that you were mistaken about what you saw that night, and he will ensure you are well compensated. You could return to Philadelphia, live comfortably. No more running." The lie was so obvious it would have been laughable under different circumstances. Marcus Dalton did not make deals. He eliminated threats. "We can do this the easy way or the hard way," the voice continued, losing some of its false friendliness. "But either way, you are coming with us." The glass window at the front of the shop exploded inward as one of the men threw a rock through it. Delilah screamed and ran for the back door, but it burst open before she reached it. The second man stood there, blocking her escape, a gun already drawn. "Now, that was not very neighborly," he said, advancing into the shop. "Mr. Dalton is going to be disappointed that you are being difficult." Delilah grabbed the scissors from the nearest table and held them in front of her with both hands, knowing how pathetic she must look but unable to do nothing. "Stay back." The man actually laughed. "Little lady, put those down before you hurt yourself." Then a voice like thunder spoke from the shattered front window. "The lady asked you to stay back. I suggest you listen." Nathan stood framed by the broken glass, his pistol aimed steadily at the man who had been advancing on Delilah. His face was set in an expression she had never seen before. Cold, hard, absolutely uncompromising. The man in front of Delilah froze, clearly calculating his odds. His companion was still somewhere outside, which meant Nathan was outnumbered. "This is none of your concern, Sheriff," the man said carefully. "We have business with Miss Reynolds. Any business in my town is my concern. Now you are going to put your gun down very slowly and step away from the lady. We have legal authority to bring her back to Philadelphia for questioning in a murder case." The man was trying for reasonable, but Delilah could hear the anger beneath his words. "We are working for the Dalton family, who have significant connections." "Funny, I did not receive any paperwork about this. No warrants, no official requests for extradition, which tells me you are not here legally at all." Nathan's gun never wavered. "Last chance. Put the weapon down." The tension in the room was suffocating. Delilah saw the moment the man decided to take his chances. His gun started to swing toward Nathan, and she screamed a warning even as Nathan's pistol barked once, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. The man collapsed with a cry of pain, clutching his shoulder where Nathan's bullet had struck. His gun skittered across the floor, and Nathan kicked it away as he moved into the shop. "Delilah, come here," Nathan said, keeping his eyes on the wounded man. "Stay behind me." She obeyed, her legs shaking so badly she could barely walk. Nathan positioned her behind him, then raised his voice. To the man outside, "Your friend is injured but alive. If you want him to stay that way, I suggest you show yourself with your hands up." There was a long moment of silence, then the sound of hoofbeats rapidly receding. The second man was running, abandoning his partner. Nathan pulled the wounded man to his feet with his free hand, showing surprising strength. "You are under arrest for destruction of property, threatening a citizen, and attempted assault. We can add attempted murder of a law officer if you would like." "This is not over," the man gasped through his pain. "Mr. Dalton will send more men, he always does. Let him try." Nathan's voice was deadly calm. "And you tell him that Miss Reynolds is under my protection now. Anyone who comes after her comes through me." He marched the wounded man toward the jail, leaving Delilah standing amid the wreckage of the shop. Her whole body was trembling with reaction, and she sank down onto the nearest chair before her legs gave out entirely. Mrs. Thornton arrived minutes later, drawn by the commotion, and was remarkably understanding about the destruction. By the time Nathan returned, Delilah had helped board up the broken window and was sweeping glass off the floor in a daze. "Come on," Nathan said gently, taking the broom from her hands. "You have had enough for one day." He led her to his house, which sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees. It was small but well built, with a front porch and a view of the hills beyond town. Inside, everything was neat and practical. Simple furniture, a wood stove that radiated warmth, books stacked on a shelf beside the fireplace. Nathan settled Delilah into a chair and made coffee, working in silence until she had a steaming cup in her hands. Only then did he pull up another chair and sit facing her. "Tell me everything," he said. "I need to know exactly what we are dealing with." So Delilah told him the whole story. How she had been working late at a dress shop in Philadelphia 3 years ago, and had witnessed Marcus Dalton shoot a rival businessman in an alley behind the building. How she had reported it to the police, only to find that Marcus's father owned half the department. How she had tried to flee the city, but Marcus had sent men after her. How she had met Thomas in Baltimore and thought she could hide behind a new name and a wedding ring, but the men had found her anyway. How Thomas had died in her arms, blood spreading across his shirt, his last words a confused apology as if his death had somehow been his fault. By the time she finished, tears were streaming down her face. Nathan moved to kneel beside her chair, his large hands enfolding hers. "I am so sorry," he said quietly. "You should never have had to go through any of that. Now I have brought it all to your door. I should leave, Nathan. Tonight, before they send more men. No." The word was firm, final. "You are not running anymore, Delilah. We are going to end this." "How?" "Marcus Dalton is untouchable. His father has money and power and connections. No one can stand against them." Nathan's jaw set in a stubborn line that Delilah was beginning to recognize. "We may be a small town in Wisconsin, but we still have telegraph access. Tomorrow, I am going to start sending messages to the federal marshals, to newspapers in Philadelphia and Chicago, to every legal authority I can think of. We are going to bring light to what the Dalton family has been doing, and we are going to make sure your testimony is heard by people who cannot be bought. That could take months, and in the meantime, more men will come. Then we will deal with them. You are not alone anymore, Delilah. You have me, and you have this town, Mineral Point may be small, but people here take care of their own. He reached up and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. Let me fight for you, please. Delilah looked into his weathered face and saw absolute determination. This man had faced down war and loneliness and the daily struggles of keeping peace in a frontier town. He was not afraid of Marcus Dalton, and more importantly, he was not going to let her face this alone. Okay, she whispered. We will try it your way. Nathan's smile was fierce and tender at the same time. Thank you for trusting me. He stood and pulled her to her feet, then surprised her by wrapping his arms around her in a careful embrace. Delilah melted into his warmth, allowing herself for the first time in 3 years to lean on someone else, to share the burden she had been carrying. You can stay here tonight, Nathan said into her hair. I have an extra room and you will be safer with me than at the hotel. What will people say? Let them say what they want. Your safety is more important than gossip. True to his word, Nathan set the guest room up for her and maintained perfect propriety, though Delilah caught him looking at her with an intensity that made her skin flush with warmth. She slept better than she had in weeks, knowing he was just down the hall, a solid presence between her and the dangers of the world. The next days were a flurry of activity. Nathan sent telegrams to federal authorities, explaining the situation and requesting assistance. He called a town meeting and explained to the citizens of Mineral Point that Delilah was a witness in a murder case and that men might come looking for her. To her amazement, the response was overwhelmingly supportive. The miners offered to take turns watching the roads into town. Mrs. Henderson insisted Delilah move into the hotel's best room, free of charge. Even the saloon owner, a gruff man named Mr. Sullivan, offered the use of his establishment as a gathering place if there was trouble. We take care of our own, Mrs. Henderson said firmly when Delilah tried to thank her. And Sheriff Pierce says you are one of us now, which makes it settled. The prisoner in Nathan's jail, a man named Harker, was sullen but eventually started talking, perhaps hoping for leniency. He confirmed what Delilah had suspected. Marcus Dalton had hired trackers to follow her movements, and they had finally picked up her trail in Iowa. More men were likely coming, probably within the week. He is obsessed with tying up loose ends, Harker said with a twisted smile. You should have taken the payment and disappeared 3 years ago, lady. Would have been easier for everyone. Including Thomas, Delilah asked coldly. My husband, who you people murdered. Harker had the grace to look uncomfortable. That was not supposed to happen, just bad luck. Nathan threw him back in his cell before Delilah could respond to that obscene characterization of Thomas's death. As they waited for responses to Nathan's telegrams, and for the arrival of more hired men, Delilah found herself settling into Nathan's home with surprising ease. She cooked meals while he worked, mending his clothes and organizing his chaotic bookshelf. He installed better locks on all the doors and windows and taught her how to properly shoot the rifle he kept over the fireplace. In the evenings, they sat by the fire and talked about everything and nothing. Nathan told her about his childhood on the farm, his parents who had died during the war from illness, his younger sister who had married and moved to California. Delilah shared memories of her own family, her father's dedication to medicine, her mother's beautiful singing voice, the ordinary happiness of her childhood before loss had stripped it all away. One night, as they sat close together on the small sofa, Nathan reached over and took her hand. I want you to know something, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Regardless of what happens with Marcus Dalton and his men, regardless of how this all turns out, I want you to stay. Here in Mineral Point, with me. Delilah's breath caught. Nathan, I know it is too soon. I know we have barely begun to know each other. But I am tired of being alone, Delilah. I am tired of going through the motions of living without actually feeling alive. You have changed that. These past weeks, even with the danger and uncertainty, I have felt more like myself than I have in years. I feel the same way, Delilah admitted, but I cannot ask you to risk your life for me. You are not asking. I am choosing. There is a difference. Nathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. I am choosing you, Delilah Reynolds. I am choosing to fight for a future where we can both stop running and start living. Tears spilled down her cheeks, but this time they were not from fear or grief. I choose you too, she whispered. Nathan cupped her face in his hands and kissed her, slow and sweet and full of promise. It was Delilah's first kiss since Thomas had died, and it felt like coming home after a long, painful journey. She wrapped her arms around Nathan's neck and kissed him back, pouring 3 years of loneliness and longing into the embrace. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said simply. I know it is fast, but I do. I love you too. The words felt like taking a leap off a cliff, terrifying and exhilarating at once. I think I started falling for you the day we met, even though I was too scared to admit it. They held each other late into the night, making quiet plans for a future that still felt uncertain but also, for the first time, possible. The telegraph responses started arriving 5 days after Nathan sent his messages. The federal marshal's office confirmed they would investigate the allegations against Marcus Dalton. A newspaper in Chicago expressed interest in the story and sent a reporter to interview Delilah. Even the mayor of Philadelphia sent a cautiously worded message acknowledging that the previous investigation into the murder Delilah had witnessed might have been compromised by corruption. It is working, Nathan said, reading through the latest telegrams. We are building a case that is too public for the Dalton family to simply make disappear. But before they could celebrate this progress, the second wave of hired men arrived. There were 4 of them this time, harder and more professional than Harker and his partner. They rode into town at dusk, their intentions clear from the weapons displayed openly on their saddles. Nathan was making rounds when he spotted them, and he sent a young boy running to warn the townspeople. By the time the men reached the center of town, they found themselves facing not just one sheriff but 20 armed citizens. Miners with rifles, shop owners with shotguns. Even Mrs. Henderson stood on her hotel porch with an ancient pistol that probably had not been fired in decades. Nathan stood at the front of the group, his expression calm but his hand resting on his gun. Gentlemen, I am going to assume you are here for the same reason as your colleague currently sitting in my jail. I am afraid you are going to be disappointed. The leader of the group, a thin man with cold eyes, surveyed the armed townspeople with obvious calculation. We have no quarrel with your town, Sheriff. Just give us the woman and we will leave peacefully. The woman has a name. It is Miss Delilah Reynolds, and she is a citizen of Mineral Point now. She is under my protection and the protection of everyone here. You are making a mistake. Marcus Dalton has a long reach. Then maybe it is time someone cut off his hands. Nathan's voice was hard as iron. You can ride back to Philadelphia and tell your employer that Miss Reynolds will be giving her testimony to federal authorities. If he has a problem with that, he can take it up with the marshals. The standoff lasted an eternity. Delilah watched from the window of Nathan's house, her heart in her throat, terrified that violence would erupt and people would die because of her. She could not let that happen. She would not be responsible for more deaths. But before she could make the foolish decision to go out there, the leader of the hired men shook his head. This is not worth getting killed over, he said to his companions. Let us go. They rode out of town, but the atmosphere remained tense. Everyone knew they would report back to Marcus Dalton, and no one was certain what his next move would be. 3 weeks later, the answer came in the form of a telegram from Philadelphia. Marcus Dalton had been arrested on charges of murder, attempted murder, conspiracy, and corruption. His father had been implicated as well, and both were awaiting trial. The testimony of Harker, combined with Delilah's statement and evidence uncovered by federal investigators, had been enough to break through the wall of money and influence the Dalton family had built. Delilah read the telegram 3 times before she could believe it was real. "It is over," she said, her voice shaking. "It is actually over." Nathan pulled her into his arms and held her tight. "You are safe now. You never have to run again." The relief was overwhelming, so intense it felt almost like pain. Delilah sobbed into Nathan's chest, years of fear and grief and exhaustion pouring out of her. He held her through all of it, steady and strong, murmuring words of comfort. When she finally calmed, Nathan tilted her chin up to look at him. "Marry me," he said. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I am certain I want to spend the rest of my life with you. No more being alone for either of us." Delilah smiled through her tears. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in early December, in the small church at the heart of Mineral Point. Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears, and Mrs. Thornton made Delilah a beautiful dress of ivory silk. Half the town attended, crowding into the pews to witness the union of their sheriff and the brave woman who had finally found refuge among them. As Delilah stood at the altar, holding Nathan's hands and speaking her vows, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. She had lost so much: her parents, her first husband, years of her life to fear and running. But she had also gained so much: strength she had not known she possessed, the loyalty of a community, and most importantly, the love of a good man who had been just as lonely and lost as she had been. Nathan's vows were simple but heartfelt. "I promise to protect you, to support you, to love you for all of my days. You have made me whole again, Delilah. You have given me a reason to stop simply existing and start truly living. I will spend the rest of my life trying to give you the same gift." When they kissed to seal their marriage, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The winter that followed was harsh, with heavy snows that isolated Mineral Point from the surrounding areas for weeks at a time. But Delilah had never been happier. She and Nathan settled into their life together with surprising ease, learning each other's rhythms and habits. She continued working at the dress shop, and he continued his duties as sheriff, but their evenings and nights belonged to each other. In the spring, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. Nathan was overjoyed, immediately becoming absurdly protective and insisting she rest more than she worked. She tolerated his fussing with patient amusement, knowing it came from love. Their son was born in late September 1878, exactly 1 year after Delilah had stumbled into Mineral Point. They named him Samuel Thomas Pierce, honoring both Nathan's father and Delilah's first husband. Nathan cradled the tiny baby with a wonder that brought tears to Delilah's eyes. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered. "You are perfect. I never thought I could have this, a family of my own." "Neither did I," Delilah admitted. "I thought I would be alone and running for the rest of my life. But you gave me a home, Nathan. You gave me belonging." Over the next few years, their family grew. A daughter came next, born in the summer of 1880, with Delilah's green eyes and Nathan's stubborn chin. They named her Caroline Rose. Then another son arrived in 1882, healthy and loud and demanding, whom they called James. Nathan proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with his children. Delilah watched him teach Samuel to ride a horse, comfort Caroline when she scraped her knee, and rock baby James to sleep, and she fell more in love with him every day. The town of Mineral Point grew and changed around them. The lead mines began to play out, and some families moved away, but others arrived to take their place. Nathan was officially elected sheriff in 1881, a formality that recognized what everyone already knew. He was the heart of their community's safety and stability. Delilah expanded her work at the dress shop, eventually buying it from Mrs. Thornton when the older woman decided to retire. She hired 2 assistants and began taking custom orders from as far away as Madison, building a reputation for quality work. But the real joy of their lives was not in professional success or community standing. It was in the ordinary moments. Family dinners around their now expanded table, Sunday picnics by the creek that ran behind their property, quiet evenings when the children were asleep and Nathan and Delilah could sit together and simply talk. It was in the way Nathan still looked at her like she was the most precious thing in his world, and the way Delilah no longer flinched at unexpected sounds or looked over her shoulder when walking down the street. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Nathan gave Delilah a locket containing tiny photographs of their 3 children. "So you will always carry them with you," he said. "And so you can remember that you are not alone, that you never have to be alone again." Delilah fastened the locket around her neck and kissed him. "I could never forget. You saved me, Nathan. You and this town and this life we have built together." "We saved each other," Nathan corrected gently. "I was drowning in loneliness before you came along. You gave me purpose again, gave me reasons to hope for the future instead of just enduring the present." As the years passed, their children grew. Samuel inherited his father's sense of justice and his mother's compassion, eventually following Nathan into law enforcement. Caroline became a teacher, dedicated to education and helping others the way her parents had been helped. James proved to have a wandering spirit, traveling extensively but always returning to Mineral Point and the family that anchored him. Delilah and Nathan grew old together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They faced hardships, as all families do, illness, financial struggles, the normal trials of life. But they faced them together, and that made all the difference. On a warm evening in the summer of 1900, Delilah and Nathan sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the Wisconsin hills in shades of gold and purple. Their children were grown now, with families of their own, but they lived nearby and visited often. The house that had once seemed so small now felt just right, filled with the memories of a life well lived. "You ever think about how different things might have been?" Delilah asked, her hand clasped in Nathan's. They were both in their 60s now, gray-haired and weathered but still strong. "If I had not come to Mineral Point that day, if you had not been there when Marcus Dalton's men came." "I try not to," Nathan admitted. "It is too painful to imagine a life without you in it, but I am grateful every day that you did come, that we found each other when we both needed it most." "I am grateful too. You gave me everything I thought I had lost: safety, love, home, family. You taught me that running does not solve anything, that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stand and fight for what you want." Nathan lifted her hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture he had repeated thousands of times over their years together. "And you taught me that being alone is not the same as being independent, that opening your heart to someone is not weakness but strength. We made each other better, Delilah. We made each other whole." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. Neither of them was tired of being alone anymore, because they had found in each other what they had been searching for all along: acceptance, partnership, and a love deep enough to anchor them through any storm. Their story was not one of grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though those elements had been there at the beginning. Instead, it was a story of two wounded people who had found healing in each other's presence, who had built a life of quiet joy and steady devotion brick by brick, day by day. It was a story of choosing to stay when running would have been easier, of choosing to hope when despair seemed more reasonable, of choosing love when loneliness had become familiar. It was, in the end, a story of belonging. As darkness fell over Mineral Point and stars began to emerge in the vast Wisconsin sky, Nathan and Delilah remained on their porch, hands clasped, hearts united, surrounded by the life they had created together from the ashes of their separate pasts. They had both been tired of being alone. They had both been tired of running. Together, they had found exactly what they needed: a home, a family, and a love that would endure long after the last sunset faded from the horizon. The locket Delilah wore had been replaced over the years with newer versions as their family expanded to include grandchildren. Samuel had 3 children of his own, Caroline had 2, and James had recently married and was expecting his first. The Pierce family had become woven into the fabric of Mineral Point's history, a testament to the power of community and commitment. In 1903, when Nathan decided to retire as sheriff at the age of 65, the town threw a celebration that lasted 3 days. People came from surrounding counties to honor the man who had kept them safe for over 25 years. Delilah stood beside him throughout the festivities, proud of the man he was and grateful for every moment they had shared. Samuel took over his father's position, and Nathan joked that at least the badge was staying in the family. But the truth was, he was ready to slow down, to spend more time with Delilah and their growing family, to enjoy the fruits of the life they had built together. They began taking long walks every morning, exploring the countryside around Mineral Point that had become so familiar over the decades. Nathan would point out changes in the landscape, new buildings in town, while Delilah shared news from letters their children sent. They moved slower than they once had, but they moved together, and that was what mattered. On their 30th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered for a celebration. The house was bursting with people, children, grandchildren, old friends from town. Mrs. Henderson had passed away years before, but her daughter came to pay respects to the couple who had been such fixtures in her mother's life. Mrs. Thornton, now in her 80s, sat in the place of honor and told stories about how she had given Delilah her first job in Mineral Point. As the party wound down and the younger grandchildren were carried off to bed, Nathan stood and raised his glass. "I want to thank everyone for coming today. 30 years ago, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. She was running from danger, and I was drowning in loneliness. Somehow, we found each other and built this." He gestured around the room at their assembled family. "Every good thing in my life stems from the day Delilah Reynolds walked into Mineral Point. I am a better man because of her, and I will spend whatever time I have left trying to deserve the gift she has given me." Delilah wiped away tears as their family applauded. Then she stood beside her husband and added her own words. "Nathan taught me that home is not a place but a person. He taught me that love requires courage, that staying can be braver than running. He gave me a family, a community, and 30 years of happiness I never thought I would have. I love you, Nathan Pierce, today and always." They kissed to the cheers of their family, and in that moment, surrounded by the evidence of a life well lived and love well nurtured, both of them felt the completeness of truly belonging. The years continued to pass, gentle and full. Nathan and Delilah grew older gracefully. their love remaining constant even as their bodies slowed and their hair turned white. They celebrated births and mourned deaths, welcomed new members to their family, and said goodbye to old friends. Through it all, they remained each other's anchor, the steady presence that made everything else bearable. On a quiet spring morning in 1910, at the age of 72, Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep, Delilah's hand clasped in his. The entire town mourned the loss of the man who had been their protector and friend for so many years. His funeral was the largest Mineral Point had ever seen, with people traveling from across Wisconsin to pay their respects. Delilah grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had learned long ago that love does not end with death, that the bonds forged in life continue beyond it. She wore Nathan's wedding ring on a chain around her neck, alongside the locket containing pictures of their family. And she spoke to him often, sharing the small moments of her days as she always had. She lived for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, finally passing away in the spring of 1918 at the age of 66. Her last words were reported by Caroline, who sat beside her mother's bed holding her hand. "Tell your father I am coming home," Delilah had whispered, a smile on her lips. They buried her beside Nathan in the Mineral Point Cemetery, under a headstone that read, "Together they found belonging." Their children and grandchildren, gathered to honor the legacy of love and courage their parents had left behind. The story of Delilah and Nathan Pierce became part of Mineral Point's history, told and retold over the years as an example of how two broken people could find healing in each other, how love could triumph over fear, how staying and fighting could be braver than running and hiding. Their descendants continued to live in the area, generation after generation, always remembering the couple who had started it all. In the end, theirs was not a story of perfect people or a perfect life. It was a story of two flawed, frightened individuals who chose to trust each other, to build something beautiful from the wreckage of their pasts. Nathan had been tired of being alone, weary of the empty existence he had been living. Delilah had been tired of running, exhausted from years of looking over her shoulder and never feeling safe. Together, they had found what they both desperately needed: belonging, acceptance, and a love that transformed them both. Their story proved that it is never too late to start over, never too late to open your heart, never too late to find home in another person. It showed that courage comes in many forms: in standing your ground when threatened, in trusting someone new after being betrayed, in choosing hope over despair day after day after day. The house they had shared, expanded over the years to accommodate their growing family, remained standing in Mineral Point for decades after their deaths, a physical reminder of the life they had built together. Eventually, it became a historical landmark, preserved as an example of frontier life in late 19th century Wisconsin. But more than that, it stood as a monument to the power of love and belonging, to the idea that two people who refuse to give up on each other can create something that outlasts them both. And so the story ended as all good love stories should, not with death or separation, but with the knowledge that what Delilah and Nathan had created together would continue long after they were gone. Their love had produced not just children and grandchildren, but a legacy of courage and commitment that would ripple through generations. They had started as two lonely, damaged people, and had become the foundation of a family and a crucial part of a community. They had been tired of being alone. They had been tired of running. Together, they had found belonging, and in doing so, they had found everything they needed. Their love story was complete, their ending happy not because they had avoided pain or hardship, but because they had faced those challenges together and emerged stronger on the other side. The sun set on their story as it had set on countless evenings during their life together. Gently, beautifully, with the promise that dawn would come again. And in Mineral Point, Wisconsin, their memory lived on, a testament to the transformative power of love and the eternal truth that no one needs to be alone if they are brave enough to let someone in.